Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News Nightly. Peace Mission. The Vatican announces Cardinal Matteo Zuppi will be in Washington, D.C. this week for a 3-day visit as Pope Francis's special envoy. We have the latest on the effort to promote peace in Ukraine. Papal confirmation. Pope Francis approves a Shanghai bishop's appointment that's in violation of the China-Vatican deal. We'll explain. Pro-life progress. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signs the state's 6-week abortion restriction into law. And honoring Our Lady. Andrea Bocelli marks the anniversary of Our Lady of Lourdes' final apparition to St. Bernadette with a concert celebration. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden will welcome Cardinal Matteo Zuppi to the White House tomorrow. Zuppi, the Archbishop of Bologna, Italy, is Pope Francis's peace envoy. Biden and Zuppi will discuss the widespread suffering caused by Russia's war in Ukraine and humanitarian aid efforts. This is part of the Cardinal's 3-day visit to Washington, D.C. this week. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi's visit is today through Wednesday. He's already met with officials in Russia and Ukraine. And now, along with trying to restore peace, reuniting families. As the Biden administration signs off on giving Ukraine cluster bombs, this U.S. military training video demonstrating their destructive capacity, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, a veteran of the Catholic Church's peace initiatives, seen here celebrating Mass in Moscow last month, has been tasked by Pope Francis to try to find paths of peace between the warring sides. The Holy See saying the visit aims to exchange ideas and views on the current tragic situation and to support humanitarian initiatives to alleviate the suffering of the most affected and most fragile people, especially children. Many children in Ukraine have been injured or killed in the fighting. Others have been abducted, a charge Russia denies. The trip to Washington follows Cardinal Zuppi's recent mission to Moscow, where he met with Patriarch Kirill, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who has strongly supported the war. Zuppi also visited Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia says it has a sufficient stockpile of cluster munitions and is threatening to use them if Ukraine uses them. But it's already been widely documented that both sides have used the cluster bombs. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just yesterday saying,
the cluster bombs have arrived in country. I don't have a report for you today as to whether they have actually been deployed at this point, but if they have not yet, they will be in the coming hours or days because they have now very rapidly been shipped into the fight.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops imploring the weapons not be used, writing, over 100 countries, including the Holy See, have signed the 2010 Convention on Cluster Munitions banning their use, recognizing their indiscriminate nature and risk to civilian populations long after fighting has ceased. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops goes on to point out that both the United States and Russia have not signed the agreement, while also asking to pray for dialogue and peace. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Two are dead after an attack on a bridge connecting Crimea and Russia. The bridge is the longest in Europe and a key artery of military and civilian supplies for the Russians. Russia is blaming Ukraine for the attack. A Ukrainian security service spokesman did not acknowledge responsibility directly, but said the service would reveal details about the blast once Ukraine wins the war. Well, Russia has halted a wartime deal that allowed Ukraine to ship grain to countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Russia is saying that the Black Sea Grain Initiative would be suspended once Russia's demands to get their food and fertilizer to the world are met. USAID Administrator Samantha Power expressed grave dismay over Russia's decision.
This is a reckless decision that will have profound human consequences. And it is just another example of Russian callousness and disregard for human lives and livelihoods.
While the end of the initiative creates instability and uncertainty in global food markets, especially in countries such as Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia, which are dependent on food imports from Ukraine. Well, House Republican lawmakers are all smiles after passing a major defense policy bill known as the National Defense Authorization Act. They were able to add pro-life and pro-family amendments, rolling back several Biden administration policies. But the question is, will they remain in the final bill? For more on that, let's check in with Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales. Eric?
Well, good evening, Tracy. That is the concern of many pro-life lawmakers. The Senate is currently working on its own NDAA, and Democrats are already speaking out, saying that any pro-life provision is a non-starter. Now, House GOP leadership say that their amendments barring the Pentagon policies on abortion access, medical care for transgender troops, and diversity are a major blow to the Biden administration and must be kept in.
Just focus on the military. Stop using taxpayer money to do their own wokeism. A military cannot defend themselves if you train them in woke.
And you don't build a warfighting force by these socially woke, some cases you might say postgraduate seminars in let's see what interesting human theory we can use to experiment on the military.
Democrats argue Republican policies are infringing on the rights of military personnel.
They've used the National Defense Authorization Act to continue their march toward a nationwide ban on abortion care and applying it to women service members.
Congressman Ronnie Jackson, a former Navy Rear Admiral and doctor, got his amendment passed, which bars the Defense Department from paying abortion-related travel expenses for military personnel and their families.
Taxpayer money is provided to the DOD and intended to provide for our national defense and our national security. It is not to promote and support the Biden administration's radical, immoral, pro-abortion agenda.
Meanwhile, GOP Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville continues to block more than 250 military personnel from promotions over objection to the abortion policy. The lead Democrat on the Armed Services Committee claims the House passed amendments weaken the military.
The attacks on diversity, the attacks on the trans community, the problems with the abortion policy that was put in there are going to make it more difficult for the military to recruit.
But it was one of the more partisan NDAAs that we've had. But when the bill goes to the Senate, we all know that a lot of those amendments will get thrown out by the Senate because the majority is a different makeup than it is in the House.
The Senate does plan to bring its version of the NDAA later this week. Now, they want it passed and sent to a conference committee before the August recess, which is set to begin next Friday. Tracy?
Eric, I'm going to touch on something else. We know the president of Israel is addressing a joint meeting of Congress on Wednesday, but I hear that some progressive Democrats, they plan to boycott that meeting. What more do you know about that?
Yeah, that is correct. Several members of the Progressive Caucus do plan to boycott. The chair of that caucus, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, criticized Israel as, quote, being a racist state. She has since walked back those comments and even apologized. But Republicans, well, they're calling on Democratic leadership to bring some sort of disciplinary action. During his press conference today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy gave example after example of House Democrats who made anti-Semitic remarks in the past month. Tracy?
All right, Eric, thank you so much. To react to this and more, we are joined now by Archbishop Timothy Broglio, the Archbishop of the Military Services USA and the President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I'd like to get your thoughts on the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act by the House, which includes amendments banning paying for abortions and travel-related expenses for service members, as well as transgender surgeries.
Well, I'm very grateful that Congress was able to include those provisions in the defense bill. I think it's very important for the protection of human life and also the protection of the natural order of things. We continue to urge lawmakers to follow through with this. I hope that the Defense Authorization Act will also be passed by the Senate, although I suppose there are some questions about that. But certainly the protection of human life is very important. And the fact that the military should not be asked to act against their conscience is also very, very important. To put the military in a situation where they have to authorize spending or leave for something which is immoral is contrary to the whole notion of religious freedom and the freedom to practice one's faith. So I think this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and as we know, I mean, you serve U.S. Catholic military families. I'm curious, what are you hearing from them in regards to the funding and their concerns?
Well, I've heard from a number of the people that I've heard from are a number of commanding officers who are concerned about being constrained to give this authorization. And I even talked with one of the chiefs of chaplains about how to preserve a commanding officer's freedom of conscience in this situation. And the workaround that was discovered at the time was that he should kick it up to a higher level. But of course, that also presumes that at the higher level they're willing to make that authorization, which again is of great concern. People should not be placed in a situation where they have to act against their conscience. I'm reminded of a story from the Second World War where a paratrooper, a Nazi paratrooper, refused to participate in a firing squad of the local Catholic pastor and went and stood by the pastor and was killed with him. That's almost the kind of courage that's called for in this situation, the ability to resist immoral acts and also not to be a party to them.
Yeah, and as you may have heard, Your Excellency, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he told CNN over the weekend that he doesn't think the current version of the bill will make it to President Joe Biden's desk. How can momentum, be maintained on these important issues now that so much attention has been brought to it?
Well, I think one way to do that would be to have people, faithful people, contact their representatives in the Congress and in the Senate and urge that this freedom of conscience provision be respected, and also urge that it's not right that taxpayers' money should be spent on something that a large portion of the population considers immoral, and is in fact immoral.
Yeah, and something else I'd like to touch on. Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, as you know, has been blocking military promotions because of a DOD policy that uses taxpayer money to fund travel and paid time off needed for a soldier or family member in order to procure an abortion. What do you make of his actions? What do you think about this?
Well, I admire his zeal, but it's really directed at the wrong place, because those in the United States, the policymaking agency is both the executive and the legislative branches of government. So really, the military is placed in a situation where they are told to obey the civilian authority. So I'm not exactly sure that blocking promotions, which punishes the military, changes what the civilian branch, what the Department of Defense has decided to do. There should really be some restraint placed on the Department of Defense's ability to make those restrictions, rather than punishing the men and women in the armed forces who are basically required to take the orders that they're given.
Well, Your Excellency, great to be with you today. Always grateful for your time. Thank you, and God bless.
God bless you too. Thank you very much.
A judge temporarily blocks Iowa's new heartbeat bill days after it was signed into law. Republican Governor Kim Reynolds signed the pro-life bill into law on Friday. It is designed to stop abortions once a baby's heartbeat is detected, typically about 6 weeks into pregnancy. The previous law allowed abortions up until 20 weeks into pregnancy. Several abortion groups filed a suit to challenge the law. The final sentencing phase began today for the man convicted of killing 11 people at a Pittsburgh synagogue. It was the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. Robert Bowers opened fire at the Tree of Life synagogue back in October of 2018 as he shouted, "All Jews must die." Last week, jurors found that he is eligible for the death sentence. As they decide life in prison or the death penalty, jurors will hear victim impact statements. Well, we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including major news from Rome. Pope Francis recognizes a Chinese bishop previously appointed without consultation from the Vatican. We'll explain. And sow faith and the gospel tirelessly. Pope Francis gives advice to parents based on a popular parable. That's raising some eyebrows. Pope Francis decided to approve the appointment of the Bishop of Shanghai, who was previously installed by Chinese authorities without the Vatican's approval. Vatican Correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now to explain the significance of the Pope's decision.
Good evening, Tracy. Firstly, it's important to remind people that the Vatican does not have diplomatic relations with China. What it does have is a deal that was signed back in 2018 called the Provisional Agreement for the Appointment of Bishops in China. And in a nutshell, prior to the deal, many bishops in China were appointed and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, normally a bishop is appointed by the Vatican here in Rome, no matter where they are in the world. This agreement between the Vatican and China stated that China nominates bishops before they are named by Pope Francis, while the Pope supposedly had the authority to veto a bishop that China chooses. Well, that agreement has been broken by China several times, such as in April, when Bishop Joseph Sen Bin was moved from the Diocese of Haimen to the Diocese of Shanghai, which is the largest in China. It was the Chinese government who decided to move him without the knowledge or approval of the Catholic Church. Bishop Shen Bin is 53 and was consecrated as a Catholic bishop in 2010 with the consent of both the Pope and the Chinese authorities. Now, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, he is the Vatican's Secretary of State. He confirmed in a recent interview that the Vatican had not been consulted about the bishop's move and his appointment to the Diocese of Shanghai. He said this went against the spirit of dialogue and collaboration. So what has the Pope's response been? Well, Pope Francis went ahead and formally recognized Bishop Shen Bin as the new Bishop of Shanghai, 3 months after the fact, and again despite the Vatican not having been involved in the process. Now, this latest revelation has reinforced the position of many Catholics that the Vatican should never have made this deal with China in the first place. Archbishop Paul Gallagher, who is the Vatican Secretary for Relations with States, essentially the Vatican's foreign minister, told me in a recent interview that while the arrangement wasn't ideal, it was the best solution at the time. Better to have some dialogue than no relations at all. Cardinal Parolin said that the Pope's decision to approve the bishop's appointment was for, quote, the greater good of the Shanghai diocese, and that Bishop Sheen himself was an esteemed pastor. But Cardinal Parolin said that the Vatican now hopes in the future that decisions on appointments will be made together by consensus. He called on China to, quote, respect the agreement. And this is not the first time, Tracy, that China has violated the deal. As I said, for example, just last November, Pope Francis issued a statement expressing surprise and regret after Chinese authorities named Father Peng Zihao as the auxiliary bishop of Jiaxing, a diocese that the Vatican does not even recognize. And as for the Diocese of Shanghai, it has been without a bishop since the death of its last one, Bishop Jing Laxian, in 2013. In his earlier life, he had been imprisoned and sent to re-education camps. And Tracy, in 2005, Bishop Joseph Xing Weizi was made auxiliary bishop of Shanghai, but in 2011, he disappeared from public view and has never been seen since. In Rome, Colm Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
At the Sunday Angelus address, Pope Francis reflected on the parable of the sower and encouraged parents to not give in to fashions of the world and continue to sow goodness and faith in their children.
Se la parola è il seme, noi siamo il terreno. Possiamo riceverla oppure no?
The Holy Father explained that young people especially can sow the gospel in everyday life and that the Holy Spirit is at work when we proclaim the word, even when it seems as though nothing is happening. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, ethics and the High Court. A bill introducing a code of conduct for the Supreme Court will be introduced this week. We have reaction. Plus, Andrea Bocelli pays tribute to Our Lady of Lourdes in a special concert. The Senate Judiciary Committee will mark up and vote on a bill this week that would require the Supreme Court adopt a code of conduct. Democrat Senator Dick Durbin, the committee chair and also a baptized Catholic, says the bill follows a series of stories over the past 6 months that have raised ethical concerns with the justices.
This is the John Roberts Court. It will go down in history as the John Roberts Court. He has the power and I believe the moral obligation to straighten up this mess and restore the integrity of the court.
Well, the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal and Transparency Act would also add new recusal and transparency requirements under federal law. Joining us now is Mike Davis, founder and president of the Article 3 Project. Mike, great to see you again. A lot to get to, but first, you previously were a staffer on the Senate Judiciary Committee under Senator Chuck Grassley, and you also clerked for Justice Neil Gorsuch. What is your reaction to this Code of Conduct bill? I mean, what do you think about it?
It is purely political. The Democrats never pushed a code of conduct for the 90 years that liberal justices controlled the Supreme Court, including Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, taking trips all over the world with very wealthy people, including people who had business before the court. It only became a problem for these Democrats when President Trump transformed the Supreme Court to the first constitutionalist Supreme Court in 90 years. This is political. This is a way for Democrats to try to cow the justices to vote their way or to get them off key cases.
And Mike, a lot of people are asking, though, why are Supreme Court justices, why are they the only federal judges without a code of conduct? What's the reasoning for that?
Well, they are an independent branch of government. They have a code of conduct that they follow internally within the Supreme Court. It's just unconstitutional for Congress to try to impose a code of conduct on the Supreme Court. Congress can impose a code of conduct on the lower federal courts, but they have no power to impose a code of conduct on the Supreme Court. And if Democrats are concerned about ethics, maybe they should start with another branch of government, the White House, with Joe Biden taking tens of millions of dollars in foreign bribes and other corruption.
Mike, we have seen a lot of media attention on Justices Thomas and Alito lately. What do you make of that? What's going on here?
This is the Democrats trying to make up ethics concerns with the Supreme Court because they're trying to cow Supreme Court justices or get them recused from their cases. It's not going to work. All of these justices all 9 justices put out an unprecedented statement essentially telling Congress and the other political actors to leave them alone. There's no ethics problem at the Supreme Court. And
we have about a minute left or so, a little less than that. What else are you following, Mike?
There's a lot going on. I will say that be on the lookout. You're going to see another criminal indictment by Fulton County Democrat DA Fani Willis going after Trump for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed under the Electoral Count Act of 1887. It's also allowed under the First Amendment. And if it's illegal to object to elections, Democrats would be in prison for objecting to Republican wins in 1969, 2001, 2005, and 2017. This is part of Democrat lawfare to eliminate President Trump because they fear they can't beat him in November of 2024.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Mike, always great to be with you. Thanks for weighing in.
Thank you.
Welcome to Lourdes.
Here's I am sharing with you.
The Miracle Club, a movie about a group pilgrimage to Lourdes, France, had a limited release date in theaters this past Friday. Sony Film stars actresses Kathy Bates, Maggie Smith, and Laura Linney. The Catholic Hollywood director behind The Miracle Club, Thaddeus O'Sullivan, told our news partner Church Pop that he integrated his faith into the film.
My Catholic upbringing, it informed everything I did. I wouldn't say I did it as a Catholic, but I was able to deal with things because I had experience as a Catholic.
O'Sullivan also said he grew up on Lourdes water and that there was always a bottle by his home doorway. Well, speaking of Lourdes, take a listen to these stunning sounds from the shrine yesterday. That is the iconic Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli singing from the Lourdes Shrine in France on Sunday in front of a crowd of pilgrims. Yesterday's concert followed a torchlight procession and is part of a series of performances at Marian shrines around the globe. July 16th is the anniversary of Our Lady of Lourdes' 18th and final apparition to St. Bernadette in 1858. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.